Hello world! Welcome and welcome back to the channel, where today I'm making a powerful decision to upload a magical girl video essay after posting fan art of the WAP trio. September is the anniversary of when 𝚢𝚞𝚒𝚒𝚒's first manga chapter was released in Nakayoshi magazine back in 2000, and I myself am a longtime fan of the original series who watched every episode of the reboot anime as it was being simulcast every week. Now that the rest of the fandom is hanging in suspense over whether the manga sequel, 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒, will make its first animated debut in an adaptation that's decidedly closer to the source material, I really wanted to clean up everything that's been on my mind and share my ideas with you guys because I have a lot of thoughts about this topic. So, let's start! I first got into 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒 in mid-2009 when I was around 11 or 12 years old. It was my first exposure to magical girls, and as someone who was already gravitating towards superhero and science fiction stories, the combination of these genres with cute girl power aesthetics came together into an unforgettable story that more or less became my entire personality for a long while afterwards. I read all 9 volumes of the manga, and I loved 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 and 𝚤𝚤𝚒, so you can probably imagine my reaction when I joined the 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 online community for the first time and realized how much people hated the sequel and its main protagonist. Although, if you've been watching my videos for any length of time, there is precedent for me getting attached to fictional characters nobody else likes, so is anyone really surprised at this point? Hi, 𝚖𝚊𝚒𝚒𝚒. As I've gotten older, I've definitely seen the cracks in 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒, but I still appreciate it. I was able to vicariously live out my dreams of being a 𝚤𝚒𝚒 through Berry, and I'm glad to see her getting a little more appreciation in recent years. I'm also a huge fan of 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒. While it's definitely not perfect by any means, and nothing will ever replace the iconic nostalgic charm of the original anime, I still think it's a really solid adaptation, and just like everyone else, I was waiting with bated breath during the epilogue of the season 2 finale to see if they would adapt Berry's cameo at the end of the manga, which, as you may know, ended up not happening. The only thing we got was an April Fool's Day prank from a now deleted High Dive tweet earlier this year, which I can't think about for too long if I want to avoid defenestrating my computer. So, is this the end of 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒? Is there no hope that Berry and her friends will make it to the small screen? Personally, I don't think the possibility of a 3rd season of the anime based off the sequel manga is ruled out entirely, but I'll discuss that more near the end of the video, and for now, I want to talk about what I would want to see in a 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒 anime adaptation. And by that I mean sharing my personal opinions on ways the manga's flaws could be fixed. Before I start this video proper, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a mention to my good friend Hiki Yagami's video where she discussed her ideas on how an anime version of 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒 could improve from the original source material. However, her video was originally published in 2015, so that was long before any of us knew we'd be getting an actual anime reboot that would take so many unexpected twists from the original manga and 2002 anime release, so here I'll only be addressing ways 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 could change in order to fit 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒's canon. Before we begin, this video does contain spoilers for both of the anime adaptations and the manga, so this series has been on your backlog for a while. You might want to wait before listening to the rest of this commentary. Okay, let's continue. Now, as much as I enjoy 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒𝚒, one major problem I've always had with it is how none of the characters feel connected to the world of the original manga in any way. In my opinion, I see this happening in 2 primary ways. The first being how the new characters don't seem to have lives of their own before the plot requires them. Before Berry was turned into a 𝚤𝚒𝚒, she was an ordinary civilian just like the rest of Tokyo, so that means she also experienced the aliens' widespread attacks on the planet, along with Ichigo's parents, Min's brother, Pudding's siblings, Moe and Miwa, etc. But we don't see how that impacted her at all. Really, the only thing that ties her to the main series are some fleeting remarks about her seeing the 𝚤𝚒𝚒s on TV. I think she would feel a lot more realistic and grounded to her surroundings if we had even a little bit of indication of how Berry and her father tried to cope with what was going on. If they were evacuating or taking shelter in the streets like everyone else, and how this informs who she is moving forward. I know it sounds super grimdark when you put it like that, but 𝚢𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 didn't shy away from diving into more serious psychological topics, especially in the reboot anime, and I personally think one of the magical girl genre's greatest strengths is its ability to show dire stakes and emotional conflicts while still having an optimistic message at its backbone. Maybe Berry's cheerful and energetic outlook on life was made even stronger by a desire to live a full life with no regrets after enduring this dire life or death situation. Or maybe after she receives her powers, she realizes that now she's part of a group of girls who saved Tokyo from an apocalypse and now wants to have that same strength and bravery they do. That's also really fitting for her personality since she accepted her role as a Mew with a lot of responsibility. And that kind of character development can make 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒's climax an even stronger internal conflict when the public turns on the Mew and puts all the blame on Barry. So while I think she's not a bad character, she's pretty flatly written, which I think makes the fact that she's the center of 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒's orbit even more unsatisfying. As she stands now, she's basically the living embodiment of that one meme from All Hail King Julian. Am I boring? Sure. Social skills? None. But I'm loyal if you feed me and I'll never leave you because, well, I need the food. When I was first writing the script for this video, I was originally going to suggest writing out the plot point of Barry attending a rich private school altogether since it doesn't really do anything for the story except fill more spaces in her Mary Sue bingo card. But actually, I think it can still work if it's used to parallel her involvement with the Mew team. We see how she feels out of her element when meeting her upper crust classmates for the first time and how she tries to pretend something she's not in order to fit in. And this is definitely a dynamic she could have with the other girls when she first meets them and realize she's going to be working alongside these heroes who saved the world. When she realizes the Mews are her friends and accept her for who she is, and that 𝚤𝚒𝚒 still stays by her side even after she tells him her secret, this could help her feel not so afraid to be herself amongst her classmates, and this experience in turn could volley back into her getting closer with the other Mews. Everyone has had their own fake it till you make it experience and felt intimidated when compared to someone else who you feel is way out of your league, so I think having Barry be an audience surrogate who represents these anxieties could make her a lot more grounded and realistic. Her applying to a new school she barely knows anything about just for the sake of them having cute uniforms. Yeah, that doesn't need to come back, but honestly I don't think it's as stupid as it looks at face value. If she's 12 years old and attending middle school for the first time, then this would be her first time wearing a uniform since they're not worn in Japanese elementary schools. And there's a not insignificant amount of young girls who grew up with the magical girl genre and couldn't wait to enter middle school themselves so they could wear a school uniform of their own and be like their favorite heroines. So really, I think this was just a case of Nakayoshi appealing to its audience. The only reason why I say this should be taken out is because this is supposed to take place in Tokyo Mew Mew News continuity, where they basically said, you know what, Mew Mew Power had a point and aged up all the girls. So in all likelihood, Barry would be entering high school and not middle school, so the novelty of her having a cute uniform to wear isn't really there. I still really appreciate how she was able to attend the school through her own hard work to prove her teachers wrong, and if they kept this aspect of her personality, even and especially if she's not completely oblivious to what kind of school she's applying for, then that would be a great way to show Barry's inner character. That being said, I do think it was a mistake to have all the other Mews transfer to her academy in order to keep her safe. It just feels like it was done to make Barry more important, and considering no such lengths were taken to protect Ichigo, the main leader of the group, it just feels even more contrived. Not to mention it would feel kind of redundant in Tokyo Mew Mew News specifically, since we already have Mint posing as a student at Ichigo's school on her first day in order to give her the museum tickets since she was cooperating with Ryo and Keiichiro to find Mew candidates. Obviously, other details such as Barry being fused with two animals can't be retconned out since it's too important for her identity, but I think it's still possible to make it work through a different approach. For starters, we got a glimpse of there being a new Mew project that was thrown out almost as soon as it was introduced, so could Barry's unique fusion be part of that initiative rather than her accidentally getting two animals shot into her? Could this contribute to why the St. Rose Crusaders have such a vested interest in Barry, besides her power being equal to Ichigo's? Speaking of accidents, I do think the way Barry got her powers was kinda dumb, so I hope a third season will come up with a setup that's more natural than her just running away from Ryo and towards the infusion device after she slipped on some cake. Again, audience surrogate. If Barry is going to be visiting Cafe Mew Mew New, then both she and the audience will be seeing what it looks like for the first time after it was remodeled. And considering the cruise ship episode was a party hosted by Ryo and Keiichiro to advertise their menu items, it's clear that the cafe has more of a real-world presence in the reboot than simply functioning as the Mew Mew secret hideout. So wouldn't it make more sense for there to be a grand reopening event for the cafe after it's repaired, with Barry being in attendance and her coming in contact with the device after getting lost trying to find another room or being overwhelmed by a large crowd? Actually, now that I'm writing this down, I can totally see there being a scene where Barry wants to go to the cafe, but there's a long line going out the door, so 𝚤𝚒𝚒 just picks her up and parkours up the building while Prince is carrying her and sneaks her in through the window so she can go inside without having to wait for that huge crowd, and the room he dropped her off in just happens to be where she gets infused. Okay, I'm kind of obsessed with this idea now, and I desperately want it to be canon. Getting back on topic, What problem is the new Mew project trying to solve that the girls can't get done on their own? Surely it's for something greater than just cleaning up the leftover Chimera Anima. If they do build upon that plot point, could that be a way to bring back the upgraded attacks the girls had in 2020 Return? What if there was another new threat for the Mew Mews to stand up against, and the 𝚖𝚒𝚒𝚒 Crusaders also happen to show up to further complicate things when they see that Ichigo is away after saving the world from Deep Blue? In episode 12 of the reboot, the girls' powers make them impervious to the Moth Chimera's poison, so what are some meaningful ways Berry can exhibit her own power from having two strands of DNA, other than her being on the same tier as Ichigo? If Ichigo is an ambassador to the aliens, then what new things could she have learned about the aliens and their powers that she could then pass on to the other Mew Mews to augment their combat potential? Of course, a superhero's weaknesses are more interesting than their strengths, so what are some drawbacks of Berry having two animals in her? You know, other than her transforming into a cattail rabbit every time she sneezes. I wouldn't object to this being made canon in the main story, but it's still not enough. What if this prevented her from being able to use the Mew Aqua? Because Tokyo Mew Mew New is the only version of the main story where Ichigo didn't die and come back to life after the final battle, what if instead Berry was the one who could only stay transformed for 3 minutes? If so, could she find a way to stay transformed for longer over the course of the season? Because Rio can transform into Alto for a 10-minute period, or else he'll be trapped in his cat body forever. Could he possibly guide Berry on how to make the most of her limited time while she's transformed? Moving on to Tasuku, he definitely has a lot of potential to be affected by Tokyo nearly becoming a morgue, as I've always felt like this kind of experience would really add a lot of context to why he's so clingy towards Berry. He made a childhood promise to give her a hug every day, and after facing a situation where the two of them could have died, his enthusiasm could come from a place of wanting to see her alive and well. In general, I always believed Tasuku had a lot of depth that wasn't really explored fully in the manga. We know he lives with only his mother, so depending on either when his parents split up or when his father passed away, he would have already experienced the loss of an immediate family member by the time he was at Berry's mother's funeral when the two of them were 5 years old, and this could have been a major contributing factor to why he sought nothing of reaching out to her and comforting Berry when she was at her lowest point. If this headcanon sounds familiar to you, yes, I did submit it to Hika Yagami from my personal Tumblr years ago, and she featured it in one of her videos. Look man, I'm famous! Overall, the biggest problem Berry and Tasuku have is that they were given a lot of focus at the expense of other characters that were necessary to structure the story, only for them to not really do anything interesting with the extra screen time they had, so a balance needs to be struck between making the two of them more faceted, while still allowing both the new and old characters to mutually develop each other instead of slanting things too heavily in Berry Tasuku's direction. This is something that I think 2020 Return really improved upon, despite the main plot being only 2 chapters long, and I hope a potential 3rd season continues to go in this direction. We already got a glimpse of that in the manga, where Rio instructed Tasuku not to hesitate to kill him if any harm were to come to Berry and he was prepared to face the consequences of starting the Mew Mew project. If this confirms the prevalent headcanon about his incompatible DNA possibly giving him less than 5 years to live from the start of the story, then that could add a lot of nuance to why he turned down Lettuce's confession in episode 16. When the Mew Mews begin gaining more star power, this sudden rise in popularity might be overwhelming for some of them, especially for Ichigo, Berry, and Lettuce, so it'd be interesting to see how some of the girls who aren't used to getting this kind of attention could see a different side to Mint Pudding and Zakuro, who are either seeking that kind of public recognition for themselves or have already achieved that, and how they could possibly learn from each other as a result. Also, would Ryu and Keiichiro be affected by this Mew Mew boom as well? Even if it's only indirectly, I think it would be really cool to see their individual reactions towards their biological weapons becoming cultural phenomenon, and considering we saw the two of them fight Chimera Anima along with the girls in episode 20, I'd love to see them get more proactively involved in these conflicts with the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders. By the way, I really hope we get more interactions with Masha and Ucha. Since Masha can speak full sentences again in the reboot anime, it'd be so funny to see what kind of dynamic he'd have with this trash-talking robotic strawberry. But yeah, considering Mint was given a lot of extra development in the reboot, having the new characters bring out different sides to the rest of the gang could really help them catch up. Especially Pudding and Tart. I feel like they got the shortest end of the stick at the primary cast when it came to character progression and new. Zakuro kinda got left out as well, but what we did get of her was still really good, and I hope she'll have more opportunities to grow in a 3rd season. I mentioned Tart a second ago, so what if the aliens were to come back into capacity other than just Pudding having an extraterrestrial house husband? We've definitely missed the train for more world building lore that the aliens were in dire need of, but at the very least we can see the trio meeting the other characters outside of fighting each other. One of the big biggest criticisms fans have had about the reboot is the way Quiche was handled and how this made his redemption harder to swallow, so having the trio come back to hang out with the girls and possibly help them with this new danger could help with that. Because of how the season 2 finale was handled, Rio did get left out of some character growth he previously had in the manga, where he gave Pai the rest of the Mew Aqua so they could restore the planet, so giving him an opportunity for more friendly interactions could help make up for that. Also, can Pai's glasses from 2020 Return make a comeback here? Please, if I ask really nicely. What if 𝚤𝚤 came back to Tokyo early on in the season like he did in 2020 Return, rather than just showing up at the end of 𝚤𝚤's last chapter? Could he still utilize the power of the Mew Aqua? One gripe I had about the reboot is that the Strawberry Bell version up power-up felt really underutilized, particularly during times like episode 15 for example, where one of the Mew Aqua pieces actually was found, so any excuse to bring it back is a win in my book. In the few scenes 𝚤𝚤 and the aliens had with each other in 2020 Return, you could really see the pastry trio struggling to come to terms with him being deep blue, which would be fascinating to explore more depth. At the very least, could 𝚤𝚤 and Ichigo go on a double date with Barry and Tasuku? That'd be so cute. Okay, speaking of characters who are disconnected from the original manga, now we need to talk about the St. Rose Crusaders. I talked a lot about the first of the two problems I see a la mode's characters having, and the second biggest strike against the sequel's cast is how inconsistent they are with the story's thematic backbone. In the main series, everything from the setting to the motivation of both the heroes and villains was all working together to deliver its primary message of environmental conservation. And having this new group of antagonists who are basically just we have Magneto at home come out of left field like this really feels like a mismatch. That being said, I do think there are ways to rework the Crusaders to make them still feel like they're part of a story with this prevalent of a theme. First of all, it's been explicitly stated in canon that yokai are actually animals that have been turned into chimera anima, but that was just a passing remark from Keiichiro that was never fully expanded upon, and I think there's a lot of unexplored potential here. It's not like there aren't yokai who can't shapeshift into humans, so that could definitely be an explanation for how the St. Rose Crusaders were born with their powers. Maybe somewhere in their lineage one of these shapeshifted creatures got together with a human and the boys inherited powers of their own. Considering a la mode is where we got our first really good look at Mia Ikemi's love for Japan's Edo period, it probably wouldn't be too out of place, and it could be a way to show how the antagonists change over the passage of time, as the aliens first inhabited Earth hundreds of millions of years ago, and now we're taking some inspiration from the 18th century. I don't know, I'm trying my best here. Speaking of chimera anima, 2020 Return was our first introduction to these monsters now having the potential to be created through human intervention, so incorporating that plot device into a third season and having it tie to how the St. Rose Crusaders got their powers could help bridge that gap, especially since at the beginning of a la mode there were still some leftover chimera anima lying around that they had captured. And yes, while the plot in a la mode doesn't carry the same theme of protecting wildlife and the environment, that's just one of the 4 categories of corporate social responsibility. The other 3 being ethical or human rights responsibility, philanthropic responsibility, and economic responsibility. The ethical/human right responsibility angle is probably the best for this arc of the story, since we see how the St. Rose Crusaders were rejected by their family and friends because of their powers, and how this motivates them to create a new utopia where nobody is ridiculed for being different, how they don't resent the people who shunned them and instead wish to be acknowledged by society, as well as how they brainwashed the city into hating Tokyo Mew Mew in order to turn the people the girls protected against them. Actually, that's one plot device I really hope gets played up in the reboot. I think the idea of launching media campaigns to manipulate public perception of the heroes has a lot of potential, especially in a modern day adaptation of the story that makes use of current technology. In this era of cancel culture, disinformation, AI deepfakes, and social media algorithms that reward misleading and hateful content, this premise written for a story that originally came out in 2003 has astonishingly and unfortunately aged very well, and there's literally so much that can be explored here. Shoot, there's even the opportunity to bring back Rika Minagawa from season 2. You know, Sakura's prodigy filmmaker classmate who learned the Mew Mew's secret identities after shooting their MD and is basically Michael Cimino reincarnated as a tiny anime girl. Anyway, I can totally picture a scene where the citizens first begin to succumb to the Mew Mew hate, and Rika tries to make a stand in their defense by using her platform and resources in an attempt to help the others see that the Mew Mews aren't a danger, but it ends up being in vain as she's overwhelmed by the brainwashed people of Tokyo and becomes hypnotized herself. Maybe even going so far as to reveal the girls' secret identities? I just think that'd be so cool! Because of how ubiquitous the internet is, anyone around the world who has access to a TV, computer, or smart device could fall prey to this Mew Mew hatred, and I think that will make the stakes of the St. Rose Crusaders' actions feel a lot higher, since while the aliens were out to reclaim the planet, the antagonists in 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 seemed to only be interested in Tokyo, as that was where the Mew Mews were based, so their goals didn't feel as ambitious as they could have been. This way, while everyone on the planet has been turned against the Mew Mews, the St. Rose Crusaders would have taken care of the main opposition standing in their way, giving them the perfect opportunity to advance in their plan to grant Duke's wish. Come to think of it, the Crusaders didn't really use their powers at all during the climax in the final volume, as they were basically just setting up the Mew Mew's public image only to tear it down through the use of propaganda. So hopefully an adaptation in 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 can allow them to actually do something special with their powers by combining it with this technology, because really the only member whose abilities got their time to shine was Happy Child. As for ways the St. Rose Crusaders could be connected to the main message of Tokyo Mew Mew, what if they represented anti-environmentalists and they saw the powers they were born with as proof of human advancement that shouldn't be interfered with by green ideology? Before I move on to my next topic, there's one thing I can't help but wonder about should the St. Rose Crusaders return in a new adaptation. Are they going to change Duke's character design? Now, I understand the creative decision Ikumi was trying to make here. Their headdress is inspired by the capirote worn by Catholic penitents during the final week of Lent, and it ties into the specific religious theme naming of the villains. But most people aren't going to make that connection because that iconography was appropriated by the KKK. So, what are some ways that a hypothetical third season could implement a Coco's Ninja trick edit of their own? Well, they could just remove the head covering outright, but you are losing that distinctive silhouette Duke has for the first half of the series, which feels kind of wrong. If they really wanted to hone in on the liturgical theme, which by the way was horribly underutilized in my opinion, it was just there for rule of cool purposes, then they could give Duke the mitre that the popes and bishops wear, which serendipitously has the same shape language as the capirote. That's right, our genderqueer mastermind got promoted, baby! Yeah, this does mean Duke will have their face exposed at all times, and not just when they take off their headdress during their encounter with Tasku, but honestly I think it's a worthy compromise. Typically, when a masked character removes their headpiece, it's meant to signify some big reveal or plot twist associated with them, but considering we know basically nothing about Duke whatsoever, the scene presented as is in the manga has zero payoff, so that element of mystery concerning Duke can be left on the cutting room floor. That being said, if the anime staff can find some way to rewrite Duke to give them more flavor and backstory, then that would be a huge improvement over the source material and would make the face reveal scene so much more impactful. And boy, are the St. Rose Crusaders in desperate need of some TLC. An interesting thing about them compared to the Pastry Trio is that the aliens are acting solely as themselves without any pretense of disguising themselves as humans, while there's definitely a divide between the St. Rose Crusaders' regular selves and the identities they adopt after Duke comes into their lives, which I think is an opportunity to explore how they could take 𝚤𝚒𝚒𝚒 into a different direction from the first two seasons by making use of secret identities that the aliens never had to rely on. Considering one of the keywords in their team name, what if their motives were patterned after the actual historical crusades from medieval times? If the writers really wanted to hone in on the religious theme, it would be interesting to see other themes being explored through them, like persecution complexes and overall having a mentality that the rest of the world is inherently evil and they're the only good ones. I know how this can all sound really similar to the aliens MO on paper, but I think there's a lot they could do with this theme rather than just straight up pulling a Sailor Moon S or Mermaid Melody Pure where they're straight up referencing the Archangel Michael, the Holy Grail, and the Eucharist. It's a low-hanging fruit, but if they do decide to play up this angle of this new character group's theming, then that opens up a lot of fertile ground to give them meaningful friction with this corner consisting of aliens and trust fund orphans who believe in science. Also, after the heroes free everyone in Tokyo from hypnosis, the St. Rose Crusaders admit the extremity of their actions and peace out. So does that mean they just go back to being social pariahs? Especially after the season 2 finale, there's definitely room for the antagonists to get a happy ending of their own where their problems are solved instead of them just being portrayed as an enemy that needs to be defeated. And one of my favorite parts of the reboot was how they eliminated that false dichotomy. What is Duke's origin story and how did they get their powers? Was Duke also an ordinary human who was born with special powers and grew to marginalize others after facing ridicule? Or are they a supernatural entity? Okay, maybe not the latter because that would make them too similar to Deep Blue, but still, these are things that need to be addressed because a badly written villain results in your hero turning out even worse. Considering there are 4 main members of the 𝚖𝚘𝚒𝚒 Crusaders plus the leader, I think there's a lot of room to go with a classic one-on-one dynamic for each of them against Mint, Lettuce, Pudding, and Zakro, with Ichigo and Berry working together to take on Duke. I could see the breakdown looking like Royal Highness and Mint, Blue Bayou and Lettuce, Happy Child and Pudding, and Sweet Juliet and Zakro. The last 2 are probably the most obvious counterparts, and my logic for the former half of the pairings is that Royal Highness and Mint both have that elegant vanity je ne sais quoi about them, while Blue Bayou serving as the group's muscle and brain simultaneously makes him an interesting counterpart for Lettuce, since she was able to intuit the alien struggles while also being a powerhouse in her own right. Remember when she went full on Wanda Maximoff in her debut episode and how she kicked Pai's butt in episode 23? If the aliens were to come back in Ally mode, then it would be a lot of fun to see Pai and Tart work together with Lettuce and Pudding to take on their counterparts. And of course, Mint and Zakro need to have more Yuri moments during their own confrontations with the antagonists. That's just a given. Overall, I feel like the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders have the exact opposite problem as Berry and Tasku, where they had a lot of potential to be more memorable characters, but there just wasn't enough screen time allocated in order to develop them properly. Considering Duke also commented that there were plans to do more with them along with the rest of the characters in the Berry's Breaking News bonus manga, it's safe to assume that Mia Ikumi had the intention of fleshing out the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders and the returning cast, but all of those concepts were jettisoned by the powers that be at Nakayoshi. So those were my personal thoughts on how the characters could be improved, and now I want to briefly talk about ways to touch up on plot points that are in need of a facelift. The reason why it will be brief is because, well, there wasn't really a plot in Ally mode, as it was so rushed that it basically functioned as character-driven wish fulfillment, but darn if I don't try! In the very beginning of the story, Ryo and Keiichiro have been discussing data throughout the city that's like none of the Chimera anima they've faced so far, which is requiring them to prioritize the new Mew project in order to deal with it. Obviously, this is a separate issue for both the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders and the remaining parasite aliens the pastry trio didn't bother corralling up. So what if this mystery plot device was actually the main conflict of the season, and the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders were secondary antagonists for the Mew Mews to raise the stakes higher? If this plot device does get explored, could the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders use that in order to gain the upper hand on our heroes? Considering they do have a prototype monster that was adapted from Chimera anima, assuming I'm interpreting Duke's text correctly, it seems like they definitely have more resources at their disposal than just their base level superpowers. I also find it weird that they saw the Mew Mews as their enemy from the beginning, but they didn't really do anything to make a proactive move until Berry just conveniently happened to get infused, which really exacerbates her main character syndrome. So what if the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders were already active from the time we first see what the main Mew Mew team is up to, and that's the threat they're dealing with instead of the straight Chimera anima? Then the plot point brought up by Ryo and Keiichiro could surface and tie into Berry's introduction by having her be uniquely qualified to help the girls with this new danger. We have no idea what it was Ryo and Keiichiro saw, so anything's possible, but what if it explored a different angle of the environmentalism theme that the main series wasn't able to cover? What exactly was the Mew project intended to be anyway? It seems like Ryo and Keiichiro were experimenting with creating a new team of Mew Mews from what little we saw in the manga, which honestly I don't think would work at all. Let's just focus on the main 5 and Berry, please. Despite all of my up-talking about how the Mew Mew hatred plot device could work in a modern adaptation, I do think having the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders being the ones responsible for starting the Mew Mew fad just to turn everyone against them doesn't make sense. It just reminds me too much of Screenslaver from The Incredibles 2, and we don't need more villains like that, no siree. Honestly, after saving the world from an alien invasion, I don't think the Mew Mews need any more help staying in the public image, so that could just be something the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders take notice of and uses to their advantage in order to run their smear campaign. Plus, honestly, I feel like the only reason Mew Mew Mania was even a plot device in Ally mode at all was to implement vertical integration with all the real-world merchandise for the IP after the success of the original manga series, anime, and PS1 game, so it's a product of its time that doesn't necessarily need to come back. For the scene that kicks off the story's climax, what if instead of the Mew Mews being framed for planting a bomb in Shibuya, it was actually something the Mew Mews did that caused real damage, which ended up being the turning point? Here's my proposal. The 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders themselves appear and set forth a plan that threatens the lives of the people, and the girls show up to stop them. What they don't know is they're actually doing exactly what the 𝚖𝚒𝚒 Crusaders hoped they would do, and they intentionally strategized this plan in order to set the Mew Mews up for failure, so that when they use their powers to fight back, instead of saving the day, what they end up doing is causing destruction. The girls never could have foreseen this outcome and have to take the blame for what their powers have caused because they aren't any wiser to what the St. Rose Crusaders' true intentions were, thus triggering the public outcry against Mew Mew. This would actually be a really good way to make the Barry as the new leader of the Mew Mew's plot device make more sense narratively, because as the current head of the team, she would be the one who would shoulder the responsibility of what went wrong, which would absolutely justify the public's hatred of her specifically and why they believed the old Mew Mew turned on them once she came around. So this trap, plus the riot, on top of the main conflict of the story, could culminate into a huge, dramatic final battle for the heroes that needs to be resolved by way more than just the power of love. Now, I've done a lot of yapping about ways a la mode could work in a new anime, but does Tokyo Mew Mew New actually have a snowball's chance of getting a third season, or am I just being delusional? Personally, I'm of the mindset that no news is good news, and there isn't anything that outright deconfirms an adaptation of the sequel, but at the same time, if nothing happens, I also won't be surprised. Remember when everyone was worried that Kodansha wouldn't translate the sequel when they removed the 2-page preview at the end of the final volume of the original Japanese and Tokyopop's release of the manga, and it got delayed twice before eventually hitting the shelves 19 months after the third omnibus came out? Anyway, while watching Tokyo Mew Mew New, I noticed a lot of changes from the source material that, while neither of them are smoking guns on their own, are enough to make me wonder if those changes were deliberately made in anticipation for a la mode to get a season. First of all, the transformation phrases. For the first 15 chapters of the manga, the girls didn't need any items or phrases to activate their transformations into their Mew Mew forms, but once the anime began airing, we see a change in volume 4 of the manga where Ichigo says Mew Mew Strawberry metamorphosed for the first time. However, Ichigo was the only girl to have a different transformation phrase in the reboot anime, where instead she says Mew Mew Ichigo metamorphose. This could have been done in order to make Ichigo more consistent with the rest of the team, or maybe it was planning ahead for Barry's introduction so they wouldn't be too similar to each other. Speaking of Ichigo, in the season 2 finale, she decides to go to space and become an ambassador for the aliens, which definitely opens itself up for a much more natural explanation for Ichigo to be gone and have Barry fill her place as the team's leader rather than her leaving to study abroad in London with Aoyama. Plus, in the first episode, when Ichigo and Aoyama were on their museum date, both of Barry's red data animals can be seen in the exhibits, and I desperately hope that's more than just an Easter egg. There was even that one headcanon making the rounds on Japanese Twitter positing that the researcher Aoyama looked up to could actually be Barry's grandfather. Looking outside of possible hints in the anime itself and turning our attention to the manga, there's the fact that the anime creators decided to use the same designs for the Mew Mews, plus the Blue Knight in Deep Blue, that were first introduced in 2020 Return, which as we know marked a huge comeback for both Barry and Tasuku where they had meaningful interactions with characters from the main series, especially the bonus chapter where Aoyama and Tasuku have their conversation. Are you kidding me? Considering the reboot anime is coming off the tails of the manga, which was even reprinted to have the 2 volumes of a la mode plus 2020 Return as books 8 through 10 of the series rather than categorizing them into their own isolated stories, it feels like an a la mode animated adaptation is more likely than ever, as if the creators really want to make sure the audience remembers who these new characters are and what the cast is supposed to look like in future iterations of Mia Ikemi's classic series, so surely that has to be built up for something. Last but not least, there was also a leak that the animators do have plans to air multiple seasons for Tokyo Mew Mew New, although things could get tricky here since there are 2 seasons of the anime, so technically they could just call it a day after that point since that's the bare minimum you could do to keep your promise. I've been talking about all the ways I think an animated a la mode could happen, but there also happens to be a lot of obstacles standing in the way of this idea becoming a potential reality. Yes, there are a lot of interesting tweaks in the reboot that can be interpreted as having been made with a la mode in mind, but there's also one huge change that creates a massive plot hole in a la mode, which is the fact that Ichigo didn't sacrifice herself to bring Aoyama back to life after Deep Blue was killed in the final battle. In a la mode, this caused problems for Ichigo where she was slowly regaining her powers, where she couldn't stay in her Mew Mew form for longer than 3 minutes or else she would transform into a cat. Although, considering this only happened one time on page and Ichigo was able to hold her own in every subsequent battle, I'm sure there could be an easy way to rewrite that scene so Ichigo's degenerating power is retconned while still providing the girls with an obstacle during their fight with Happy Child, which shouldn't be that hard considering Barry was the weakest to his power. Overall, I think that's the most realistic way to look at an a la mode anime adaptation. It's not impossible, but there's a lot of work that has to be done in order to make it happen. And I'm not even just talking about the amount of script doctoring necessary to properly address the flaws of Alamode's plot and character development. For 22 years, we've been able to form a very specific idea of how the characters of Tokyo Mew Mew are supposed to look and sound, thanks to the original anime adaptation and related media that was created to advertise it. So the studios behind the reboot anime had a lot of material to work with compared to Tokyo Mew Mew a la mode, where this would be the first time most of these characters would be drawn in color, and definitely the first time we would hear any of them speaking. Not only would there need to be reference sheets created for the new cast, essentially for the first time, they would also need to find actors to portray them, and considering the process that went into finding who would play Ichigo when the reboot was first announced, would they hold a similar audition process for Barry? How would adding a new member to Smewthie affect the dynamic of this idol group? There's also locations that would need to be designed as well, such as Barry's house, her school, the St. Rose Crusaders' lair. Cafe Mew Mew was destroyed by Deep Blue at the end of season 2. What's the interior gonna look like now that it's been rebuilt? Will Barry finally get a Mew mark? That also needs to be designed for the first time too.
But Barry doesn't have a Mew mark because she was too close to the injection device when she was infused.
I can hear you say. Remember, Ryo shot himself point blank in the neck with his cat DNA and he still has a Mew mark, so nobody could have gotten closer than he did. Unless Barry having two strands of DNA somehow cancels each other out and prevents a mark from forming, there's no reason for her not to have one. Another thing to keep in mind is that Tokyo Mew Mew New and 2020 Return were created to commemorate the 65th anniversary of Nakayoshi Magazine's first issue, and the Tokyo Mew Mew manga also got a 60th anniversary reprint, plus some new merch and artwork drawn by Miya Ikumi back in 2015. So considering this pattern, maybe there could be an announcement for a third season either later this year or in early 2025 for Nakayoshi's 70th anniversary. And of course, there is the elephant in the room that needs to be addressed about Ikumi's unexpected passing back in March of 2022, almost exactly 4 months before the first episode of Tokyo Mew Mew New premiered no less, and the impact this could have on subsequent releases of Tokyo Mew Mew media and products that now would have to be made without her involvement. When looking at other famous mangaka who have also departed this life, such as Kentaro Miura, Kazuki Takahashi, and Akira Toriyama, it's not necessarily a given that an intellectual property will cease to exist after the loss of this creative leader, and there's a definite possibility that after the first 2 seasons, the staff just needs more time to recover from her loss and find a new approach after this worst case scenario ended up happening. Notoriously, there was a lot of additional story and character development Ikumi had planned for Tokyo Mew Mew a la mode, but all of that got the axe from her editor. Who knows, maybe the anime team could pull a familiar Zero move and adapt Ikumi's original ideas that never made it beyond the planning stage by consulting her editor, and we know he's still involved with the franchise because he was also editor to Madoka Seizuki for the all-male spin-off manga Tokyo Mew Mew Ole. On top of that, a la mode just doesn't have enough material on its own to be made into a full 12-episode season. The manga is only 10 chapters long, and we know the anime definitely isn't shy about combining episodes either. So while the original manga ran for 27 chapters that needed to be adapted into 24 episodes of the reboot, a la mode will require 2 anime-exclusive episodes at the bare minimum. Although considering how much shelf material and untapped potential there was in a la mode, I'm sure that wouldn't be too hard to accomplish. Especially since a lot of my ideas I talked about earlier are basically ways to combine a la mode with 2020 Return. Having said that, I am painfully aware that the marketing for Tokyo Mew Mew New has been a confusing mess, which doesn't bode too much confidence for future developments, but that rant is beyond the scope of this video. To cut a long diatribe short, I feel like Tokyo Mew Mew New was granted a lot of opportunities the original anime didn't have, but still ended up being dealt the worst hand imaginable, which is unfair considering the original manga helped save Nakayoshi Magazine after Sailor Moon ended serialization, and it really deserves better than the roughshod treatment it's gotten thus far. Oh boy, my script is already well over 8,000 words long, so I think that's enough psychotic rambling for one day. I think I've said everything I wanted to anime. Those were all just one person's hopes for how Tokyo Mew Mew New could address a la mode's flaws. If you're a big fan of this series too, I'd love to hear any ideas you may have on this topic in the comments. On that note, let's shut this video down. Make sure to give Boba Cat some pats, snacks, and playtime before you log out, and head to the description of this video to find links for every other corner of cyberspace I'm on. A big thank you to Hiki Yagami, Berry-chan X, Ribbon Strawberry Surprise, Sailor Spider Pig, and 𝚤𝚤𝚒𝚎, whose contributions to the Tokyo Mimi fandom provided a wealth of resources as I was researching for this video. And of course, thank you for watching and letting me chat with you. Until next time, 俺にたっぷりご奉仕するにゃ。